Hey, Church Girl, we're so glad that you've tuned in with us today. We've got a really fun topic for today's roundtable. We've got some boss babes in the room, and we're going to talk a little bit about women in business. And Joy, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kindra, for being here.
Yes.
Both of you are, I would consider both of you true, boss moms, boss babes.
Thank you.
Incredible women in business and in your respective industries.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your career path and how you got where you are today and what you do.
Sure. So I work in advertising, but I'm the chief marketing officer right now of a company called Kindbody.
Cool.
The way I got there is kind of untraditional. So I started in advertising. I started at the big agencies like Publicis, Ogilvy, and I worked on beautiful brands like L'Oreal, and I worked for Bacardi on Grey Goose. I thought that was my life passion. I thought I would be this person working in advertising, traveling everywhere, and I did that for about a decade. I'm lucky because I found my passion career, which is developing stories and narratives, but in a category that I love, which is healthcare. So I'm very blessed because I could have kept going, and I'm sure we'll get to it later. I didn't feel fulfilled in what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's great. What about you, Kindra?
So I currently manage digital content at Estée Lauder. But I have overall throughout most of my career, I've been a style and beauty editor. But
Very
it's
similar.
yeah, but I've taken the roundabout way to get to where I am,
Yeah.
which really is just shows you that there's like no mistakes that you can make. It all makes sense now. Everything I did in the past makes sense. But I started off in magazines. Rest in peace to magazines. They're not what they used to be. It's so sad. But I started off my career at Cosmo magazine, and I just really was like, I was in fashion at the time. I was like, I'm going to be a fashion editor. This is it. And then I started doing HollywoodLife.com, which got kind of gossipy.
Yes.
And I didn't like that. I liked talking about the fashion and the beauty, but I didn't like the gossip. So I thought maybe I don't want to write at all. Maybe I just want to be a publicist. So then I became a fashion publicist for some years. And that is when I was at Trinity always praying about a job. I think I was coming to Kristen every 8 months like, I'm believing God for a new job. Because I just kept finding myself in crazy, toxic companies. And then I decided to leave and start going into work for myself. So I started blogging and I started doing my own content creation. And from there, all of the opportunities came to me. I started freelancing with a lot of different beauty brands. And then Estée Lauder came to me and I started managing their digital content. So
That's great.
That's where I'm at today. But it's been a long journey.
Yeah, I love that you both shared where you started and then where you are, because I think a lot of people, when they get started on something, they think, okay, this is it, this is where I'm going, this is where I'm headed, and often we actually fall more into our calling than we do, trying to get there and navigate it, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that both of your journeys kind of show that and prove that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people are trying to figure out, okay, God has put a dream in my heart, or God has given me something that I'm really passionate about. But sometimes they can feel like, is this a part of my calling? Is this a part of my purpose? So maybe talk about how your career either plays a part in your purpose, or maybe you feel like, okay, I'm right in my gifting and, where God has called me.
Well, I think, first of all, I think that when you're first starting your career, like you said, you have to be open to so many paths to get to where you want to go. I was actually having this conversation earlier with someone on my team, and I said, do you think that my ultimate goal is to be the CMO of Kindbody forever? Is that it? No, my ultimate goal is to change policy for women's health and live in DC and work with, not be a lobbyist, but to work with big business and to work with politicians to change it. But I know that that's a path that I'm on, and I don't know how I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
But I know that's my calling. That's my passion. But it's also, I feel like, my life's mission. I didn't know that starting in advertising, working on L'Oreal at 22 years old.
Right.
At 22, I thought, we have very similar stories. I thought I'd be like the Anna Wintour of advertising.
Yeah.
And I thought that was my life's mission, and I felt like at the time I would have said, like, that's my calling.
Yeah.
But you go through life, you have children, you have relationships, and you realize if you have a gift, I feel like I do have a legitimate gift of combining art with commerce and art with business. in this vein, then you realize that you could, you know, when I switched to healthcare, this was really what was crystallized for me. I realized that my gift is helping people understand what they need to purchase or buy or consider. And I did it so many years for spirits and makeup. And that's not a bad thing. People need those. But why can't I do it for people as it relates to the most important thing outside of obviously the relationship with Christ, but the most important thing, which is their body and their health?
Yeah.
And if I have this gift to convince people to purchase, why am I not using it for the greater good?
That's really,
Yeah.
I think you're really touching on something, because sometimes as Christians, we think that maybe our career is separate from, what we believe, our
Correct.
theology.
Yeah.
And there's really not we don't get to compartmentalize our life.
Yeah.
There's an ethical way to do business and do marketing and
Yeah.
to live out your calling, and you don't have to sacrifice one
Yes.
for the
And
other.
I think people often think you can't work in a secular world and have this calling. But
Right.
I truly believe in every place, particularly the last 10 years, every place that have been in, not only is the work my calling, but me being there is my
Yes.
calling, right? Like the people that I impact, the way they see God show up in my life, the way they see, like, that is also part of the calling.
Yes.
Yeah.
To be embedded inside where there's, this is going to sound a little dramatic, but where there's no light, and to be the light,
Yeah.
you know?
We are. We're
And to
called
make
be
a
light.
decision in those corporate settings where
Yeah.
they're making decisions off of emotion, but you kind of pause it and say, this is not actually human. I use that word a lot to keep people on the same page. This is not,
Yeah.
we're not showing humanity here when we have to lay someone off or we have to be. So
That's
I
great.
think that's part of the calling too.
Yeah.
So good.
And I don't think that's dramatic at all. I think that I believe that I have been placed in the industry that I'm in
Yeah.
to be a light. And I believe that is part of my calling. I remember my dad was talking to me about being in full-time ministry. And I'm like, I don't think that that's where God's calling me to at this time, because I know that I'm making more of an impact right now by doing what I do in the church and by doing,
Yeah.
by being who I am in the world.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And I believe that that's, part of my calling. And so I think for me, it's understanding that my job is not who I am. That's even why I sort of kind of gave the background of all the different things that I've done, because I had to realize that, okay, I am a storyteller. I can do that at church. I can do that for this brand. I can do that for my own company, for my own blog, or for another company. I have certain giftings that I can use in so many
Yeah.
different ways. And I used to think that I needed the job
Yeah.
that was going to like get me to that next level, or God, what's the job that's going to
Yeah.
help me to use my gifts, where actually it was the opposite. It was me fine-tuning who I
Yeah.
am, fine-tuning my gifts, working on my integrity.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have integrity, you won't be sustainable at high levels in any of these companies.
That's it.
And so working on who I am, and once I strengthened that, then more opportunities came. Because I actually remember when I first moved to the city, I told God, it's like, okay, God, if you make my name great in like the fashion industry, I'll make your name great. And then I forgot.
Then you forgot.
I forgot my part of the business,
Yeah.
and I got lost in the sauce of like
Yes.
the industry, and I wasn't holding up my end of the bargain. And that is where I think I went through a bit of a wilderness season, until I came back into my calling outside of work,
Yeah.
but who I am and how God has called to use me in my relationships, to use me in the lives of other women.
Yeah.
And when I started to be obedient that way, that is when my career started to actually escalate and start to look like what I thought God promised me it could
Yeah.
look like.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Like when you chase a job and not like your passion, or not seek like how can this connect to a greater mission, the job
Yeah.
title is always like, I call it the slippery slope. When you're like, I want this title. So
Yeah.
many people that come to me are like, I would like to be a chief marketing. I'm like, the executive level was never like my goal.
Yeah.
As I aged, as I matured, I remember that I wanted this title. I wanted to be a director, and then I wanted to be a VP. And then there was a moment where it shifted, and it was like, I want to make this impact.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that changes kind of your trajectory, like you said,
Right.
because now to use your words, you're holding your end of the bargain.
Yeah.
And so now I think, and I try to tell a lot of people, like, don't think about the title. Obviously, we have to think about the pay because we live off of this job.
Yeah.
But think about like, what's the impact? And that's when you also know when to go if you're no longer impactful, because you can't stay in a place that doesn't allow you to showcase those gifts beyond like the tactical, like
Yeah.
the tangible, you know?
Yeah, that's really good. I think that's incredible. I love both of your journeys. One of the things that Taylor and I always say is we say everyone needs a mission in the world and a ministry in the church, right? So God has given us, talents, giftings, part of our, DNA, how we're made, right? Not to just be used only in the church.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get that confused. We can kind of communicate, if we're not careful, leave the secular world, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, people need to be trained up, sent out every week back to their workplaces to be a light in the darkness.
Yes, for sure.
And, with that though, walking in calling, walking in purpose, and all of those different things, it also requires oftentimes some sacrifice, right? And I'm sure you guys have had to make some sacrifices, whether that was in a new season, maybe motherhood. Joy, you've been a mom now for 8 years, right? And Kindra for 5 weeks.
5 weeks.
So it's quite fresh, right? But, talk a little bit, because sometimes people think they have to choose one or the other.
Yeah.
And you don't.
No.
You can still go with your calling and still be called to be a mom as well. So,
Yeah, for sure. I think, so I was what they call a late mom. I had my daughter at 38. It wasn't necessarily intentional. I did know that I wanted to have a kid in my late 30s. That somewhat was intentional, to wait. I got married at 32, and then we waited a couple years, and then we struggled a little bit. I had a miscarriage, and then this amazing baby came at 37, and I was almost like a week from 38.
yeah.
But I remember my mom had me in her early 20s, and I remember watching her be stretched so much.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to myself, I definitely feel like it's a calling for me to be a mom. I was terrified of it, but I felt like it was part of my calling. And I just needed to, for me, find the time that I felt like I could be mature enough to handle the pressure of both. Because it is hard. I don't think people say, oh, it's not so difficult. It actually is, because the mother is always the first person to be called.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if you have the most amazing husband and the most amazing dad.
Yeah.
The children always want the mom. So you're on all the time. And I think for women like us, we also are very fulfilled by our careers.
Yeah.
So I remember just being like, I need to get to a place where I can emotionally understand that I can't do everything perfectly all the time and give myself grace. So I just remember I kept saying I need to mature.
It's great.
Before I actually bring someone else into this world. And then when I did it, all that planning kind of went out the window, because you just go with the flow.
Right.
And children are the most forgiving humans. They're so accepting of what's going on. Yeah. I think having a child has actually made me a better professional.
Yeah.
Because I have learned to look through her eyes about how to explain things to people, to understand that people don't see things the way that I see them, to apologize quickly. I learned that from your child is upset by something you did, you apologize quickly because you want to teach them to do it, but also you don't want them to be hurt. And I never really did that before I had a child. So I think that being a mom actually I always say makes me a better human, but definitely made me a better leader in the workforce.
Yeah.
And I'm blessed to have an amazing maternity leave. I'm on mat leave right now, so that's good. So I can really just focus on motherhood. And then, when he'll be 6 months old when I go back to work.
That's
so
great.
That's a blessing.
That's right, Estée Lauder.
Yes.
European company.
Yes. So I'm just happy that I'm able to have that flexibility. But even with that, I looked at the women. There are moms on my team. There are moms in my workforce. And so I leaned to them early on in my pregnancy, how do you do this? How do you manage this? And then I think to me is the biggest thing is going to be having boundaries.
Yeah, for sure.
As much as I'm fulfilled by my job, I'm so glad that God had to separate my identity from what I do. My identity is not in my job title. That job could be gone tomorrow,
For sure.
and I'll still be who I am, and I'll still have just as much to bring to the table. And so because of that, I'm going to go back to work with my boundaries.
Yeah,
There will be times when I'm like, you know what? This is a all hands on deck season. This is what we have going on this week. Mommy's going to be busy this week.
Yeah.
That's going to be the reality of it.
Yeah.
But that's not going to be every week. That's not going to be every night. I want to be the mom that is home for dinner. I want to make sure that I can be available for different things in my kid's life. And so I haven't fully walked into that.
Yeah.
So I might be like, Joy, can you help me out?
For
How do
sure.
I do this?
For sure.
But I know that I'm going in with my intention
Yeah.
that I can have it all. They say you can have it all, but not at the same
Yeah.
time. And so some seasons may
Yeah.
call for more
Yep.
areas, giving to one area than the other. But I'm going in with the heart that like my family comes first,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
that this job is an extension of me, but not who I am.
I think the time is perfect for that. Like,
Yeah.
we're very blessed that we grew up in a time where there's more working mothers and more working mothers
Yeah.
executives. So it's not uncommon to have those boundaries. I do have those boundaries. I didn't have them when she was 3 months. I didn't know, but to your point, you figure it out. So there's things
Yeah.
like, I don't take calls after 7:30. I
Yeah.
will not get back online after 7:30. I will get online maybe at 6 o'clock in the morning if I need to, but I will not get back online. But I'm completely available.
Yeah.
If you need me, you can call my cell, which usually stops people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they think, like, do I need her?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
those boundaries came after I realized, like, my family is the most important to me.
Yeah.
And those moments I won't get back. Right? So I agree with you. I think at a certain moment you kind of figure out, like, and I totally recognize there's privilege in certain levels. So I totally
Yeah.
get that
Yeah.
too. But you do kind of figure out, and I think this concept of balance, you realize that doesn't really exist. It's really integration. It's
No,
this
yeah.
work-life integration where you have an amazing spouse who you can say, listen, I'm gonna need you to carry this load for like 3 days because it's like really busy at work, and you will cry a little bit because you're not there for nighttime routine.
Yeah.
But your kid will be stronger because
Yeah.
they understand that mommy has to work.
Mhm.
And then I think about even like my daughter, I bring her to work sometime, and that like it's an integrative experience for her to see
Yeah.
me at work. And this was through COVID, honestly. Like, she would hear me on the phone and she would be like, who were you talking to?
Mhm.
Are you in charge of them? And I'm like, you realize that kids are very receptive of what's, so I was like, let me bring her to the office. And that I think helps the office realize
Yeah.
this is a mother too.
Yeah.
And so they respect it. And it's just, you
Yeah.
find your way where people start to vibe with like your energy, and they realize, okay, she's a mom. My
Yeah.
boss says like Joy has no boss except Ella.
Yeah.
Like,
I love that.
Absolutely. Like, she has no boss but Ella. And I'm like, for sure, she
That's
comes
it.
first.
That's it. Yeah, I like what you said about that. I like how you talked about how in this season, like being a mother and giving Ella what she needs and
Yeah.
prioritizing her, right? Like, she's the priority, but you didn't have to give up,
Yeah.
your calling, your passion, and kind of choosing to say, let me take her on the journey.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be so separate,
Yeah.
right? One or the other. It's okay, come to work.
Yeah.
Like, be a part of this call,
Yeah.
and you're actually given opportunities to show them what that looks like, a
Yeah.
strong woman,
Yeah.
what that looks like having great, graceful conversations that are really difficult.
For sure.
Some kids, they never hear that. They never get to experience that. And so even for me, just as a mom in ministry, is like, because a lot of people in the church, even, they think that, okay, well, God's work comes first.
Yeah.
And God's work is taking care of my family for me
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not a good pastor if I don't pastor my
I was
kids
like, wait,
first.
just said sentence. But no, you're the ultimate working mom. Like,
Yeah.
you're like, integration is key to how, like, ministry doesn't stop.
It doesn't stop.
It doesn't clock out.
But
Yeah.
and showing my kids that too is a big thing. Is like, there are certain meetings that do stop
Yes.
at a certain time, right? But there are people who call in who are at the hospital at 8
Yes.
p.m. and mom and dad, or just mom's gonna go pray for them. Like,
Yeah.
they get to see that and be a part of that. I grew up as a pastor's kid.
Yeah.
My dad would take me to the hospital
love
with
that.
him, and I'd pray for people who were
Yeah.
dying.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And like, he would have me on the journey, and I just think that we've got to understand that, like, we can take our kids
Yeah.
with us.
Even
know?
taking Nora on the road with you sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes when I preach, she'll
Yeah.
come with me, and it's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, very hard to have her on her schedule
Mhm.
and all of that, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
And
It
I
makes
think
it more tangible for them.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
like, this matters.
this matters. I see my mom, I see my parent. She's actually doing something that's not including me. And I think it
Yeah.
helps them understand, like, oh, there's dimensions to my mother. Like,
Mhm.
I grew up thinking my mom was just my mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I hit a certain age and I was like, wait, what?
You're like, oh, she has a name.
It was like, I think we're raising our children to understand, like, my mom is multidimensional. Like, women today can be mothers, they can be partners, they can be parents, they can
Yeah.
have ideas, they can be entrepreneurs. Like, and then let's just imagine what that's inspiring in them.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And then being able to understand and navigate the seasons
Yes.
of, okay, this requires more attention at home.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to say no to a lot more things
Yes.
because this is requiring more attention. Or no work, I know that this is a season where it's a little bit more and I'm going to need a little more help,
Yeah.
right? And so also, like, you can't do it all,
No.
right?
I mean,
and
yeah.
you
No,
can't.
I mean, I've turned down a job that was amazing. To your point, it was like that 24-year-old me was like, this is the job that you've been asking for.
Yeah.
And like the pay was amazing. It's like funny because you think I didn't have to work very hard for it and they gave me everything. God wants me to take this job. Like you're like, I didn't have to, the pay was right, everything. But it was gonna require me to travel 2 weeks out of the month. And Ella was like 4 or 5, which is critical. It's like she's about to go to pre-K. This baby that I had all to myself is about to go into the world. And I just remember being like, I can't take this job. And I had to turn it down. And that was the sacrifice. Like it was a sacrifice, but not really. It was a sacrifice. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was, I like cried over that. It was emotionally like, and the fear of like, well, where does that put me? But then God is amazing because I came full circle and where I was supposed to be. But at that moment, I just was like, why would you give it to me?
Yeah.
Why would you give it to me?
Dangle this in front of my face.
But it was like an exercise of faith and also to reset, like, are you defined by this job?
Yeah. It's
Or by
kind
your
of like
calling?
testing.
Yeah, it was
right?
a test for
A
sure.
test of like, okay, like all of this, like I've developed you, here it all is, but the sacrifice was too great.
It's too great.
The calling to be a mom is, it's an invaluable.
Yeah.
It's one of the best things.
And I think sacrifice is such an important topic because now we live in this age where it's very easy to see people going into business for themselves and everybody wants to have their side hustle and their main hustle.
Yeah.
And on social media, it looks all good. And you see the girl with her boss babe desk
They're
and like,
exhausted.
they are
They're
exhausted. There is no way but to sacrifice sometimes. And even when you think about whether you're a mom or not, it's like, okay, am I going to wake up early or am I going to stay up late?
Yeah.
There are certain seasons that just require sacrifice to get to where you want to be.
Yeah.
And you've just got to bear down and do it.
Yeah.
And I think that people don't want to hear that these days. Like I know
That's so
Kim
true.
Kardashian was under fire because she was like, get up and work.
I was like, I didn't see the problem.
I saw no
totally
problem
agree
with
with her.
Maybe the language was a
Maybe
little
the tone.
the language was a little harsh.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes you just gotta like get up and work and go for it. Nothing comes easy. And especially whether you're in an entrepreneurial setting or whether you are in a corporate setting, it's competitive.
It is.
And I used to think that I was somebody who talent got me in the door for a lot of things.
Yeah.
But talent isn't going to keep me there and it's not going to escalate me.
Yeah.
No.
And so in order to get where I want to be, sometimes you just have to be working harder than the person next to you.
Yeah.
And there's no way around that.
And as a mom, you have to figure out the buckets of time that you can do that, right?
Yeah.
Because like it's just so funny how you change. Like when you have these children and you're like, I'm gonna send this kid to this school, they're gonna have these friends, and you think, oh, it's fine. But then you're like, in 10 years though, this kid's gonna be with like my kid, 22. I want to like them.
Yeah.
So you're like, and I want to like make sure we agree on philosophical things about life.
Yeah.
So where am I putting them during this time when they're, 5 to 18?
Yeah.
Where am I? Because they're around that environment that's not your house for like 8-10 hours a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, so you think about like other things, the sacrifice of time, and should I get up early to make sure that I can do better at this job so I can afford this for that? Like you're always, I think mothers were always doing lists in our heads. We're always doing the pros and cons. Like we're constantly making decisions through the lens of what's best for my family. Even if it's a work decision, an entrepreneur, you're always doing that in your head all day.
Oh, you're so right.
Yeah.
And I think maybe someone watching today would say, okay, what should I do next. Maybe they're saying, I've got a dream in my heart that God has given me. And we're committed to the journey of how that starts out and then how we end up maybe somewhere else. But what advice would you give someone who's saying, I'm just starting my career, or I'm thinking about a switch in my career? Maybe they're, navigating and juggling some other things as a mom or a wife or a college student, who knows, the journeys that people are on. But what advice would you give, to someone starting out?
Yeah. First pray about it. First, like that's the first thing you need to do, and enter into a space that you're actually going to be listening.
Yeah.
Because I think we probably both I prayed about a lot of things, and then I had my mind made up before I went into the prayer.
Yeah.
So I was just listening for what I wanted to hear. So pray with really an open heart that you really want to hear.
Yeah.
And then I think practically you want to, I'm a big write it down. Like write down what is it that you want to do. When you can see it on paper, then you can kind of figure out where it seems so confusing. You can start to see what I call areas of opportunity. Do I know a person that does this? Do I know someone who has said they could do this? You start to kind of, it's just a strategic way to figure out how do I get to A to Z? And when you can see it, then it doesn't feel overwhelming. Yeah. And then I would say start, get up. Don't just, I mean, the job is not going to come through the ceiling into your living room. You have to get up. And today it's easier than ever because you have the internet. You have things like LinkedIn where you can find someone who has a job that you want and engage in conversation with them. I'm aging myself, but we didn't have that 25 years ago when I started. You had to hustle. You had to, really, it was relationship driven. Now you can create the relationship. So I would say that's the most important. Take one step forward.
That's so good.
I love that. I would say to first become a student and consume, it's so everyone nowadays, well, not nowadays, just in general, it's so easy to say, I want to mentor. Can you mentor me? But if that person that you admire, do they put out content? Have they written books?
Yeah.
Do they do Instagram lives? Do they have things that are out there that you can actually consume to learn from them? Great. You don't have to know someone today for them to mentor you. You can have a virtual mentor that is 1,000 miles away and you don't even have their phone number. So consume the content and the information, the knowledge that you want. And then I think 2 would be to start doing it now, now with social media and everything like that, or even if it's something that you can do in your church, or if there's a way that you can help a friend for free, you're not going to be able to start off having $1,000 clients. You might just have to start doing it pro bono on your own, but practice and get familiar. And then don't forsake getting out there in the real world. Go to events, meet people. The amount of beauty panels and things that I went to, and I was just a sponge. When then you meet somebody, and oh my God, this will be my last one. Don't forget the people that you meet that are your peers along the way. It's so easy to want to get close to that person who's the chief marketing officer, but that person who's your peer, it might be that person who's actually able to give you that referral later on and that you're able to go along the journey. The people that I started interning with, 10 years ago, where they are now, and those relationships are so much more valuable now, and I'm glad that I didn't just say, oh, she's just an intern.
I will double down on that because I think people aren't nice to each other. They're competing for the same job. Or you're the same type, particularly in our industry where it's not a lot of people of color. So they would always be we would, but I found that when we united, to your point, now I'm 25 years in the industry, and some of the biggest names in major companies like Netflix or Condé Nast, these are people that I say we grew up together. So when I'm I can call X person, it's not a fluke. Even if I haven't spoken to them in 5-10 years, the relationships we had as we were coming up and the integrity that we showed each other. So I would say, my dad used to say, on the way up, you're going to meet them on the way down. So make sure you are leaving a nice taste in everyone's mouth. Be kind.
Yeah, that's great advice. So I love hearing from both of you and both of your experiences. If I could finish us off with something, it'd be Colossians 3:23. Such a great verse. And in any season you're in, you can hold on to this verse. It says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord. And I think we forget sometimes that whatever we do, whether you're in that season of the job that you hate, You still are called to work at it with all your heart as if you're working for the Lord. And it'll be the same, like we just said, the way you treat people, the way you love people on the journey, those things, they matter for when you do get to where you want to be, right? And so maybe you're a mom and you've got a dream in your heart. Wherever you're at, work at it as if working unto the Lord. I believe God's going to bless you. He's going to bless your dream because God gave us these dreams, right? When we align ourselves with Him, we've gotten it wrong. But when you align yourself with Him, you go, oh, this isn't just something I came up with. This is a part of how God knit me together. And so know that you're not alone. God's with you. And when He opens a door, you can know and you can have assurance that you can walk right in faith. In the business world, you talk a lot about taking big risks. And I would say it's the same as taking a step of faith. It's a step of faith. You don't know what's ahead. It's a risk, but you can trust in God. And that's the good news of knowing Jesus. That's not just some risk that you're throwing out there. You know that you always have a solid foundation to stand on. And so I hope you're encouraged today. If you like what you heard, you can share with a friend. You can subscribe. But thank you again, Joy, Kindra, for being a part. All right, we'll see you soon, Church Girl. Bye.